It is often said that the most dangerous man in the world is not the one holding a weapon, but the one holding a printing press. In the early hours of a cold November morning in 1902, three men in dark woolen coats stood in the shadow of a brick warehouse in Chicago. They weren't looking for gold, and they weren't planning a break-in. They were waiting for a delivery. A carriage pulled up, its wheels splashing through the icy slush. A wooden crate was unloaded, heavy and smelling of fresh grease and iron. Inside this crate was a highly specialized industrial-grade printing press. But this machine wasn't ordered by a newspaper or a legitimate publisher. It belonged to a young man named Arthur Williams. At just 22 years old, Arthur did not look like a mastermind. He was quiet, thin, and had the intense, focused eyes of a craftsman. To his neighbors, he was just a skilled engraver who spent too many hours working late. But to the United States Secret Service, Arthur Williams was about to become public enemy number one. He was a man who had accomplished the impossible. He had created a counterfeit $100 bill so perfect, so utterly flawless, that even the Federal Reserve itself could not tell the difference. To understand the audacity of Arthur's work, we have to look at the currency of the turn of the century. In the early 1900s, a $100 bill was an immense fortune, equivalent to several $1,000s today. It wasn't paper money as we know it now. It was a work of art. The bills, known as Monroe Heads or silver certificates, were printed on massive, intricately designed plates. They featured highly detailed portraits, complex geometric lathe work, and tiny microscopic red and blue silk fibers embedded directly into the paper to prevent forgery. The government believed these notes were absolutely uncopyable. They proudly declared that no human hand, outside of the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, could ever replicate the depth of the portraits or the exact texture of the paper. They were wrong, because they hadn't met Arthur Williams. Arthur didn't start his career as a criminal. He was a prodigy of engraving, a young man who fell in love with the sheer beauty of metalwork. He could look at a copper plate and see lines that the human eye normally ignored. But the legitimate printing industry paid pennies, and Arthur's family was struggling. One evening, while staring at a genuine $100 bill under a magnifying glass, a dangerous thought crossed his mind. He didn't see an official document of state power. He saw a challenge. He saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. For nearly 2 years, Arthur turned his rented room into a secret laboratory. He didn't rush. He knew that the slightest mistake meant a lifetime in a federal penitentiary. The first and most difficult obstacle was the paper. True government currency paper was made of a secret blend of linen and cotton, sourced from a single, highly guarded mill. If the paper felt wrong to a bank teller's touch, the game was over instantly. Arthur tried hundreds of variations. He bought old ledgers from the mid-1800s, soaking the antique pages in chemicals to strip away the ink, trying to pulp and recreate the exact weight and texture. Eventually, he discovered a brilliant, simple secret. By taking 2 incredibly thin sheets of high-quality Japanese tissue paper, placing genuine silk threads between them, and gluing them together with a proprietary starch adhesive, he created a sheet that matched the government's paper perfectly. It had the exact crackle when folded, and the exact thickness when measured with a micrometer. Next came the engraving. This was where Arthur's genius truly shone. Using a fine steel burin, working under a powerful lens for 12 hours a day, he hand-carved the portrait of President James Monroe. Every single hair of the beard, every tiny shadow in the eyes, was carved with microscopic precision. If his hand shook by even a fraction of a millimeter, the plate would be ruined, and he would have to start over. When he pulled the first test print from his plate, using custom mixed inks he had formulated himself, Arthur held it up to the light. He placed a real bill next to it. He looked at them for an hour. Even he could barely tell which one was real. Armed with his perfect plates and his custom paper, Arthur began his operation. He didn't try to buy luxury cars or live a flashy lifestyle. He knew that sudden wealth attracts attention. Instead, he teamed up with a quiet distributor, a man who knew how to slowly and carefully slip the bills into the mainstream economy, starting with small towns, saloons, and crowded racetracks. The plan worked flawlessly. Thousands of Arthur's bills flooded the Midwest. They passed through the hands of shopkeepers, local banks, and eventually the regional treasury offices. No one noticed. No one raised an alarm. For months, Arthur Williams was effectively printing his own unlimited wealth, completely invisible to the law. He had beaten the system. But in the world of high-stakes counterfeiting, the greatest danger rarely comes from the police. It comes from the people you trust. As Arthur's perfect $100 bills silently circulated across the United States, they eventually reached the heart of the American financial system, the sub-treasury in Chicago. It was here, during a routine audit, that a veteran clerk noticed something unusual. The bill in his hand felt identical to a genuine Monroe Head. The portrait was sharp, the ink was rich, and the silk threads were exactly where they belonged. But under a high-powered microscope, the clerk spotted a microscopic error. In the decorative border of the bill, near the bottom right corner, a single, tiny leaf in the engraving was curved slightly to the left instead of the right. It was a mistake so small that no ordinary person, and no bank teller, would ever notice it. But to the Treasury, it was a declaration of war. Within hours, the United States Secret Service was mobilized. At the time, the Secret Service's primary mission was not protecting the president, but hunting down those who threatened the nation's currency. They realized they were dealing with a ghost, a master engraver whose work was so superior that it threatened to destroy public trust in the entire U.S. financial system. The agents began tracing the bills backward. They mapped every town, every saloon, and every racetrack where the counterfeit hundreds had appeared. The trail led them straight to the bustling, smoke-filled streets of Chicago, but Arthur remained untouchable. He was incredibly disciplined. He kept his printing equipment hidden in a secret, sound-proofed room behind a false wall in an ordinary warehouse. He never spent his own fake currency, and he kept his operation small. His downfall, however, would not come from a brilliant piece of detective work. It came from family. Arthur's father, a man who had struggled with debt his entire life, discovered what his son was doing in the late hours of the night. Overwhelmed by the sight of stacks of perfect $100 bills, the father begged Arthur to let him help distribute the money. Against his better judgment and out of a sense of loyalty, Arthur agreed. It was a fatal mistake. Unlike Arthur, his father was careless. He lacked the cold, calculated patience required for the game. Within weeks, the father began spending the bills too quickly in the same local Chicago neighborhoods, attracting immediate suspicion. Secret Service agents who were already watching the area quickly spotted the pattern. They placed the father under surveillance, and it didn't take long for the trail to lead them straight to the quiet, unassuming warehouse where Arthur worked. On a quiet afternoon in 1903, the door to Arthur's workshop was kicked open. Armed federal agents flooded the room. Arthur was caught red-handed, sitting at his workbench, a steel engraving tool still in his hand, putting the finishing touches on a new plate. When the agents searched the hidden room, they were stunned. They found the heavy industrial press, custom-made ink formulas, and enough high-quality Japanese tissue paper to print millions of dollars. But more than anything, they were mesmerized by the plates. The chief of the Chicago Secret Service Division reportedly held Arthur's engraved plates to the light, shook his head in disbelief, and whispered to his partner, "It's a masterpiece. The boy is a genius." Arthur Williams was arrested and put on trial. The government was so terrified of his talent that they offered him an unprecedented deal. If he agreed to hand over all his plates, destroy his paper formulas, and demonstrate to the Treasury clerks exactly how he bypassed their security measures, they would give him a highly reduced sentence. Arthur complied. He spent his time in prison quietly, reflecting on his work. But the story of the Federal Reserve's ghost didn't end behind bars. After his release, Arthur tried to go straight, but the allure of the perfect engraving was too strong. He would return to the craft later in life, chased by the Secret Service until his final days, cementing his legacy as the man who printed a fortune out of thin air. Today, Arthur Williams's original counterfeit bills are highly prized collector's items, sometimes selling at auctions for more than their face value. They serve as a silent, fading reminder of a time when a single young man, armed with nothing but a steel tool, a magnifying glass, and endless patience, made the United States government tremble.